This is Cindy Van Epps, SPCT and Agile Hive Product Management. Our expert session today is about story points, the great debate. Why is there a debate about story points? People have said to me, why not just use a time-based measure to estimate the effort of story development? Like it's 1 day effort, it's 1 week effort. Why do we have to translate it to something abstract like story points? People also want to know, should all the teams use the same story pointing paradigm? And if they do use different story pointing paradigms, how will we roll up story points to estimate features at the art level? And then don't we need a way to sanity check the work that we commit to in a sprinteration? Yes, that's one of my invented words, based on what we historically delivered. And then the best/worst question is, but it's in Scrum and safe and all the sacred knowledge sources, so surely we must use story points. Well, to understand story points better and the debate topics, let's think about the history of story points. In the 1980s, yes, that's when I started building software systems, we started with a waterfall process. And it really came from the world of hardware development, where things took a really long time to build and design. Now, remember, with hardware, people would spend years in research and development. They would spend months and years in prototyping hardware because it was expensive to build. And so we started in that world where we did very detailed upfront planning so that we could tell people when to expect their software systems. From that world and heavy project and program management, this iron triangle was born. This iron triangle fixed resources, how many people would use this, how long will it take us to do that, the time and schedule, and the scope. Here is the contract with the detailed list of requirements of what you must build. And as a result of this iron triangle of fixed scope, resources, and time, the thing that started to flex or suffer was quality. So the people who got together and built the Agile Manifesto said, in the world of software development, now on the internet-based systems, that's craziness. It's a stupid way to build software. And most notably, we were all victims of this thing, this evil thing called the plan of record. And I have seen some plan of records that would curl your toes. It's just excessive detail. I worked with one small company who contracted software development just 2 years ago, and they had each of their developers estimate their tasks down to 1/10 of an hour. That's the kind of precision that they tried to work to and manage to because they wanted to be predictable with their contracts for when they would deliver software systems. Now, part of the problem here is that it impacts our ability to do work in an agile way, to choose the priorities, to swarm the work. It also, so it demotivates this teaming idea. It also motivates some really bad practices that people would pad their estimates. Hey, I'm going to tell you it's going to take 2 weeks to do this task, even though I think it will only take two days. And so if I get it done ahead of time, then I can just, do whatever I want and pretend that I haven't finished the work. It's really bad practices inspired by this upfront planning, detailed planning, and plan of record. And then worst of all, it's usually out of date very quickly once the learning starts. I worked for weeks and weeks to help build a detailed plan for some aspect of shuttle flight design for a 2-year schedule. And within 2 weeks, I was called in to NASA over the weekend to re-baseline the plan of record. all bad stuff because we didn't want to do estimation. We wanted to build systems. So these detailed estimates, this is just a summary of what I already said. They're based on assumptions because we want to pretend that we know everything up front. They're created in isolation, one task, one person at a time. And so there are bad behaviors. We are trying to fix that. And part of that was what motivated, significantly, is what motivated this idea of story pointing and teams owning their own estimation technique represented in story pointing. We needed to get away from the micromanagement and this world, this concept that we could do detailed estimation and be held to it to get something out the door. But there's this tension, especially in a software world where we don't do a lot of research and development and upfront prototyping because we don't have to. It costs us less to build software. So then execution would exceed estimation. Why? Because execution includes discovery. We are learning. Agile, learning in small iterative cycles. The feedback that we get, constantly checking, plan, do, check, adjust. That feedback adds work, even if the work is saying, okay, we can add this part or change this part, but what things will we take off the schedule? And that feedback causes some reprioritization. And then if we rely on single tasks or single people, when one person gets behind on one task and we're not inspiring teaming, it has a cascading effect. So we want to make an energy shift. And this is what inspired the definition of something called story points. We want to shift the time and energy that we spent on detailed estimating and reporting and being beaten up for not, meeting those exact estimates. We want to shift that to execution and learning. We want to build and learn. And so to overcome that micromanagement of detailed estimates, this idea of story pointing was born. And story pointing is based on this idea that we want to do just enough estimating so that we can commit to a set of work and deliver on that commitment. And the things that we can adjust would be some of the scope. We'll shift this work in and shift that work out so that we can adjust the resources. We're going to swarm this highest priority work with 3 people on the team instead of one task and one person. So those things in the iron triangle, we can adjust, and we can adjust very frequently through agile iterations. So how do we do that? Well, we let teams come up with their own estimating paradigm. And so this idea of story points is you as a team get to figure out how does one story compare to another one? And how do we do relative estimating rather than detailed, time-based, person-based estimating to get a general idea how much is enough accuracy in my team to define the effort in a time box, like an iteration, rather than trying to do so much work. So we need a little effort in estimation so that we can commit, but a lot of effort we learned in the world of a detailed estimating really only helps a little and in fact works against us. So agile solutions were born, and part of it, a key part of agile is using relative sizing. Why? So we can estimate faster and commit to a set of work faster. The other thing we do in agile is leverage the whole team for sizing. Everyone participates in story pointing and estimation so that we build transparency and collective ownership. We swarm the highest priority work so that we control that work in process and a single person being a bottleneck. And then lastly, our subject matter experts often become bottlenecks. In engineering environments, I've worked with a lot of subject matter expertise for whom their significance is wrapped up in their expertise, and they don't feel comfortable sharing it with others. They feel threatened by that. But we have to build this teaming and team understanding and mentoring to give this what I call team elasticity, the ability to flex based on what we're learning. And lastly, I highlighted here, estimating is not about a number. When you think about story points and estimating, don't think about the number like we used to think about the hours and the tenths of hours in a plan of record. It's about the conversation, reaching common understanding within a team, an agile team, and even across teams of agile teams about what is the work and how hard is it compared to what we've done before. I used to teach a software project management class at Rice University, continuing education. And it was based on a book that had all these parameters around how to do better estimating. And one of those parameters was called precedentedness. I had to practice that so I could say it. Precedentedness. Is this something we've done before? Is it something unknown? So only the team itself can discuss things at that level so that they can determine what they can commit to. So estimating, I don't care if it's in hours, tenths of hours, story points, it's really the means to an end. And the end game here is the team owns the plan. That's a good behavior that leads to commitment to deliver that. And delivery on that commitment leads to predictability, which builds trust, and trust lowers cost. If I built you a value calculator on how a plan of record really increases cost versus an agile method, you would see some of the elements here, mostly trust, whether it's in a professional environment or a personal environment. You know that lack of trust incites micromanagement, questioning, a whole lot of churn that increases cost. And that's really what we're after, improving the flow of value and reducing the cost in time and money to an organization to get that value to our customers. So Ron Jeffries is considered the inventor of story points. And maybe you have heard, oh, Ron Jeffries himself said, I wish I'd never invented story points. And maybe in some weak moment, he did say something like that. But the latest information from him, and here's an article that I'm citing, someone asked him, do you really regret they were invented, or do you simply deplore their misuse when relative sizing is not properly understood? And certainly he said, I do deplore their misuse, but using them to predict when we will be done is a weak idea. Tracking how actuals compare with estimates is wasteful. And comparing teams on quality of estimates or velocity is harmful. So he points out to us how not to use story points. Thank you, Ron. Well, then how are we going to use story points? Let's look at how we do it in Agile Hive. This is the ARC-PI overview. If you haven't seen it in the team reports, this is my favorite, one of my favorite views. It rolls up the story points from the contributing teams up to a feature level so that we can track progress. If we don't have an idea of the size or effort of the work from the contributing teams, how can we effectively track progress? If you don't want to use story points, use something else. Please don't use detailed time estimates. One of our customers came to me and said, Oh, we don't want to use story points. We want to use story counts. Can Agile Hive change it to story counts? Well, my friend, if you defaulted your story points to 1 story point per story, guess what you would have? Story counts. Where on this widget does it say story points? Nowhere. Yes, it does say it on the issue screen, and that is the name of the underlying field, but you could use story counts here. The other way that we use story points in Agile Hive, another one of my favorite views, at this point, if you're saying, Cindy, don't you have any not favorite views? No, I don't. But this is another great one. It's the planning board from the teams. So much information here. We're using story points to kind of monitor where our load is exceeding our capacity. I tell you, to be honest, some of our teams in the Agile Hive universe don't even use capacity, and that's okay. As long as they can build a plan that they can commit to, they've been together long enough, they know what they can commit to, right? The other thing is we are showing the story points on the cards for the different elements here. These are stories and enablers. So imagine that this team, the global positioning team, is looking across these dependencies. They're trying to negotiate dependencies. For instance, there is some work that the nav controller is doing, provide synthesized GPS data to displays. The GPS team is going to go reach out to them and say, oh, I see that's a 20 story point story. And so that's pretty big, right? Is there a way to decompose that into 2 parts, maybe where you give us sample data so that we can do part of our work, and then you get the rest of the data, the real data that's coming in from our GPS system. So those are ways that we use story points in Agile Hive, and so they're useful as long as they're not abused in the ways that Ron Jeffries was warning about. So here's our conclusion, and this is also from the Ron Jeffries article. He said, well, if I did invent story points, I'm probably a little sorry now, but not very sorry, right? Hashtag sorry, not sorry. What? He says, I do think they're frequently misused, and we can avoid many pitfalls by not using story estimates at all. What he means is if my team matures to the point where they can commit to the work without having some quantification, great. If they're not providing great value to your team or company, and I insert as any agile or scaled agile practice, I'd advise dropping them on the grounds that they're a waste. If they're more wasteful than useful, adjust, pivot. If, on the other hand, you just love them, well, carry on. Okay, so that's the expert session. I took my 20 minutes, and if you have questions or further conversation, just please reach out to me on that.